Director of the Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs here at the UB, and I'm very glad to welcome you this morning. I'm very glad that this event is attracting this number of people, and I think this is a very topical subject indeed. This is for me at least, an overdue event because China has been on our radar for now more than a decade, but we have paid little attention to it in terms of research, analysis, publication, etc. This is something that we should probably repair as of now. China has been on the radar for more than a decade in the Middle East, at least in parallel with all this debate that you know about regarding the US retrenchment, changes in the global order, etc., etc. Now, while it became obvious that China is becoming a hard power player in the Middle East with the Iranian-Saudi rapprochement in 23-24, it shouldn't conceal also that for a long time China has been putting some footholds in the Middle East, at least economically, in the Horn of Africa, in the Gulf, in other areas of the MENA region. And China has been very closely also watching the Syria war, Syrian civil war or war, as you want to call it, at least because part of the foreign fighters in Syria were from Chinese origin, something that has been highlighted very recently by the decision to include something like 3,000, I think, Chinese fighters in the Syrian army. So for all these reasons, I think that, I repeat it, this event is overdue. And this is why I very warmly thank the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung and our friend Markus Schneider here for having initiated this series of papers on China and the Middle East, China, Lebanon, and Syria mainly. And I'm very thankful to our IFI collaborator, Yeghia Tashjian, who also is, besides being someone very curious about China in general and its diplomacy, has also taken the lead of putting up this event and also being one of the writers of the papers. So I thank you all for being here. So as I said, China deserves more attention, and this is something we're probably going to cover at IFI here more often, and partly at least building on the findings and what we're gonna hear this morning during this very rich exchange between you. So I thank you again, and I give the floor to our partner, the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, and Markus Schneider for a word of welcome before we start with the working this morning. Thank you.
Can I put it down on this one? The laptop, can you put it over there? Can I close it or? I guess. Okay. Yes, Joseph, dear Joseph, where are you? Okay. Ambassadors, Excellencies, member of the diplomatic corps, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests. I also see, I think, some graduate students here. I also want to wish you a very warm welcome on behalf of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung for our common IFI-FES workshop on China and the Middle East, and more concretely, as Joseph has already said, and as you can read here, China's role in Lebanon and Syria. The idea for this workshop has sprung out of a project that our office has been pursuing since 2023, actually, and which was about to assess and discuss with regional researchers and also analysts the growing footprint of China in the Middle East. And we do this obviously not in a vacuum of academic reclusion. We are here at the university. Obviously, sometimes it's very nice to be, let's say, in this ivory tower and to think about these kind of subjects. But we also do this against the backdrop of our very own China debates in Europe, in Germany. I think we do have some representatives also of European embassies here with us today, and I think most of them, they know how fierce these discussions around China can be, and how heavily ideological they tend to be at times. And I think it's not unusual that they lead to controversies and polemics, because the whole subject of China is considered to be highly political. Maybe in an attempt to very generally summarize the direction of these debates, with much caution I say very generally, because obviously, like let's say the debates, the political debates that we have in Europe are much more nuanced. Maybe I can say that there are two camps pitted against each other. There's one camp that is very critical of China and considers the People's Republic as an ideological threat to the West, and also sees a world where democracies on one side are pitted against autocracies on the other side. I may, maybe in some global battle for influence, I may call it the Anne Applebaum worldview, if you know whom I'm talking about. And then there are those who would argue that this view is too simplistic and that the world is more nuanced and that China is, of course, a rising power, but it would be better to accommodate China as a rising power and not to view it solely as a threat. Ladies and gentlemen, the overall geopolitical situation is obviously very much in flux. Right now, there's a lot of commotion, and I think, I personally don't recall it has ever been as much commotion in the international geopolitical picture, maybe apart from when I was a little boy in East Germany back in 1989. Then the situation was also quite changing. But remarkable so, I think the situation is not in flux only because of China, because despite all the talk about China being a challenge to the global order, I think it may seem that some now see China more as an anchor of stability, actually, because its main competitor for global hegemony, the United States, is reconfiguring its own role in the world. And I'm sure that many of you have probably listened to the speech that President Donald Trump gave a few weeks back in Riyadh. If you have not done so, I would strongly advise do so. Or maybe to put it in the words of his new Syria ambassador, Thomas Barrack, he has said, "The era of Western interventions is over." And I think this, out of the mouth of an American, is quite a remarkable statement, where you can actually say the Americans are moving away from where they have been before. So we have now basically the United States abandoning what they have been calling the rules-based international order. That's a term that Biden used a lot, that I think I've never heard that from Trump. They're abandoning the pretension also that they are at the helmet of an alliance of democracies fighting global autocracies, so maybe also abandoning the picture that has been behind much of the anti-China talk, because a lot of the thing is like, China is a threat because it's not a democracy and so on. But at the same time, what they did not abandon, what the Americans did not abandon, was their focus on China. So the rise of China remains at the center of their preoccupations, and so much that they're now trying to move away from other theaters, be it Ukraine, obviously that's very important for us as Europeans to see, but also, retrenching from the Middle East, trying to get out of the Middle East. And I think what we see more and more is also a push towards what certain analysts have called bifurcation. That means that the United States are putting pressure on its allies, on also these countries that are militarily dependent, to pick sides, to actually choose between either you go with us, you go with the US, or you go with China. And I think here maybe comes in again the Middle East, because I think when we look at the Middle East, it's a region where many countries have very close security cooperation with the United States. Take Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey, we have the United Arab Emirates, Israel, of course. I believe we have some representatives here of the Lebanese armed forces. Obviously, the United States is also very active with the Lebanese armed forces. While at the same time, many of these states, their main and growing economic and trade partner is actually China. So I would say that none of these regional actors are actually in the mood of choosing sides, and they're certainly not in the mood for a new Cold War. But I would say instead what we see, at least with the powerful actors, that they are masterfully playing both fiddles. So they're actually trying to navigate the new seas of multipolarity, and I think they want the best of both worlds, maybe you can say so. So they want a powerful America for security cooperation, but they will also want to have relations with an ascending China as an economic and trade partner. And I think by connecting with both of these powers, they try to increase their own political marge de manœuvre, meaning at the very best that it's not the superpowers that are manipulating the regional powers, but maybe the regional powers, at least some of them, manipulating the superpowers. When it comes to China, of course, I think its main advantage in the region has been, maybe all to the opposite of the United States, that it's being perceived, despite being a communist country, that you hear that a lot, communist China and so on, but it's being perceived as rather unideological. I would say that for the longest time it wanted to have good relations with everyone, regardless of their geopolitical preferences. And that's why I think it was a surprise back in April 2023 when we also, as office, we started to interest ourselves in this topic, when you had the Iranians and the Saudis who actually announced their rapprochement of all places in Beijing. And I think it was a surprise because it was China's first foray into the realm of security politics, a realm that it tried to avoid beforehand. But it was maybe not so surprising because I think China was maybe in fact the only global player of a certain standing that could bring these two actors, that means the Saudis and the Iranians, together. I think it's also a watershed agreement, obviously, because despite, I think, all the, the international crisis that you have been seeing the conflicts, the wars, obviously, like in this country, after the October 7th events, I think the agreement between Riyadh and Tehran actually seems to hold, guaranteed by China. Coming to an end, I think when it comes precisely to Lebanon and Syria, the topic of our debates today, I think one of the questions may be whether these two countries, our two countries here, can play a game similar to the one of the regional powers. Meaning, can they engage with both the big players? Can they engage with both America and China and get the best out of it? Or are they, rather than being players, are they rather playgrounds? Maybe what we have seen over the last 10, 15 years, for the geopolitical competition of others. So they're not real actors, as themselves, but they are being played by others. That's the big question. I think one last word, maybe, the last few weeks, obviously, since the Trump speech, and it started with the Trump speech, have been quite encouraging, when you look at, obviously, especially Syria. So we had the scrapping of sanctions at the speed of light, by the United States. I'm looking now also at Jihad, who had an article with our publication on that. So big question, will Syria emerge out of the civil war? And obviously the sanctions have been a very big issue. And I think now a whole new economic future has been opened up for Syria, actually. And ironically, maybe this realignment of American policy at the speed of light has also made Chinese engagement more likely, because I think now Syria is becoming much more attractive also for China because there are no sanctions anymore, which is maybe sometimes a bit ironical. And obviously we also hope that Lebanon will somehow profit from this situation. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I also want to thank you again, our friends here at the Isam Fares Institute, to make this workshop possible. First of all, Joseph, but also Yeghia, who has been instrumental in bringing that about, and also my colleagues at FES, first and foremost, my colleague Clemens, who has been in contact with most of you. Thank you very much, and I wish all of us fruitful debates.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Isam Fares Institute, I would like to warmly welcome our valued guests, speakers, and participants to today's expert workshop on China's evolving role in Lebanon and Syria. So I will first begin by introducing our first speaker, Mr. Tashjian. Yeghia is the Regional and International Affairs Cluster Coordinator at IFI. His work focuses on the geopolitics of the South Caucasus, the Middle East, and intersections of regional and international powers, these complex landscapes. Next, joining us is Dr. Waref Kumayha, the Chairman of Global Professional Services. He is a financial and economic expert and an international specialist in the field of humanitarian diplomacy. He served as the founder and president of the Lebanese-Chinese Dialogue Association and the Silk Road Institute for Studies and Research. He is also the president of the Arab-Chinese Dialogue and Communication Association. And finally, it's a pleasure to introduce Dr. Nisrine Abdelnour, who is director of the Confucius Institute at the University of Saint Joseph. The institute represents an important cultural and educational bridge between China and Lebanon, and today Dr. Nisrine will be presenting about its vital role. So I want to thank you all for being here today. And we're going to start, I believe, with Yeghia.
Thank you, Leila. Thank you, everyone. So we'll be talking about the Chinese-Lebanese relations, the modern relations. There was a very interesting question, actually, starting late 2019 with the protest movement that took place in Beirut and Lebanon. This question was actually being raised in the Lebanese media, sometimes by politicians, sometimes also by policymakers and journalists. Was Lebanon heading to the east? Now maybe this is a bit out-to-date question, but however, back then it was a very important question. The main argument behind this question or narrative was that, okay, there is a financial crisis happening, the banking sector is not functioning anymore and it is collapsing, the state institutions becoming questionable, then Lebanon should diversify its economic and foreign policy. So basically, Lebanon should consolidate its ties with the Eastern Bloc, that is China, Iran, and Russia. So basically, the dynamics of the Chinese and the Lebanese relations fall within this category. So my presentation will basically focus briefly on the historical relations between the countries. Also, we'll assess China's or identify China's geoeconomic interest in Lebanon, and also Lebanon's role, humble role, I would say, in the Belt and Road Initiative within the context of regional interconnectivity. We'll also assess the perception of how Lebanese communities, the major communities, they view China's involvement in the region. And finally, also we reflect on the constraints, the limitations, and also the opportunities between both countries. It's important then when talking about the Chinese-Lebanese relations here, I'm actually trying to focus on the soft power, that is the trade, investments, cultural interactions, and not hard power or security relations, which is minimum. So when talking about actually the relations between both countries historically, I would say that it was uneasy. When the Chinese or the People's Republic of China was established in 1949, Lebanon didn't recognize it. It recognized only in 1971 when the former National Security Advisor of US, Henry Kissinger, visited China, and diplomatic relations between both countries were established. So basically the Lebanese official perception was dependent on the US actions. At the same time, back then, the Maronite or the ruling elite were very suspicious of the Chinese activities in Lebanon when the Chinese were supporting the Palestinian militias. So especially there was like a suspicious, like the Chinese are trying to challenge the state or the ruling power. And starting the civil war, the Chinese took a very balanced approach towards different Lebanese factions. That is, they no more armed the Palestinians, they halted all the military supplies, but at the same time they engaged diplomatically with the Palestinians. Even interestingly, the diplomatic meetings that took place between the Chinese diplomats and Palestinians or PLO leaders during the civil war, it took place in Damascus and not in Beirut. However, these relations to some extent took a positive track. After the end of the civil war, China was engaged in the reconstruction efforts in Lebanon, and late Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri, he visited China starting 2002. The Chinese were eager to invest, especially in the telecommunication networks and the infrastructure and in the tourism sector. And in 2012, already China was the largest trading partner in Lebanon. However, even before the Belt and Road Initiative was announced in 2013, the Chinese were very interested and keen to expand the port of Tripoli. They basically invested almost $80 million in the port. And when it comes to politics, this is very interesting. There was a mini scandal, those who remember, in 2006, when back then Hezbollah actually targeted an Israeli anti-aircraft ship with the Chinese C-802 missile. And back then the Israeli newspaper started accusing China that why China is supplying Hezbollah with such weapons. And the Chinese responded that no, we are supplying to Iran, and the Iranians were supplying to Hezbollah. So this also increased the pressure on China. And after 2006, Chinese started, of course, supporting the implementation of the 1701 agreement, but they took a very low profile and cautious approach towards Lebanon. And until the recent clashes and the wars in the south and in Lebanon, the Chinese condemned both sides. They condemned the Israelis of bombing South Lebanon, but at the same time, they condemned Hezbollah of violating the territorial integrity of Israel and bombing the northern villages. So they were very balanced and cautious when it comes to Lebanon. When it comes to Lebanon's geoeconomic actually importance within the context of the Belt and Road Initiative, Lebanon plays an important role, mainly because of its geostrategic location, which is in the Levant, at the same time on the coast of the East Med, very close to Syria. And here it's very important because I will give 1 minute a regional perspective when it comes to why the Middle East is important to China, despite the fact that the Middle East is hell sometimes. If we look at the map, we see that the Chinese, the trade between China and Europe, of course, is increasing. So the Chinese tradition had the three main corridors connecting China to the West. The first is the ocean corridor, or the maritime route, sometimes called the Maritime Silk Road Initiative, which connects China, the South China Sea, to Europe. However, it passes via the Malacca Strait, which is almost under the control of the American Navy, and then goes to the Red Sea. And we know the Houthis every time bombing, targeting ships. So this is not profitable. The second option was the China-Mongolia-Russia route. However, as we know that after the war in Ukraine, this corridor was sanctioned and it is no more operational. So the only route towards Europe is left the Middle East. Despite the fact that it's very problematic because this corridor will pass from Central Asian 5 countries, then go to South Caucasus, another unstable region, and then pass to Turkey via the middle corridor, or another route is actually from Central Asia to Iran, to Iraq, to Syria, and to Europe. Both of them, again, are controversial because Syria was under the sanctions. However, this was the only option left for the Chinese to engage with Europe via the Middle East. If you go back in 1930 and see the railway map in the Middle East, you would see that it's a very beautiful map. We always like to dream. It's much better to have a dream rather than have a nightmare. So we see that Lebanon actually had 2 railway connections to Syria. One from Tripoli, the other from Beirut, and then it would be connected to Turkey and so forth. So the Chinese actually, there was a semi-official proposals to the Lebanese side to revive the Tripoli-Hamath railway. This is why they were at the same time expanding the port of Tripoli, because from the Chinese perception, the main idea was to transform Tripoli into a logistic hub to launch reconstruction projects for Syria. This is, I'm talking about 2016, 2015, when the Russians intervened in Syria, and a lot of people, they thought that Syria was heading towards a conflict resolution and the sanctions would have been removed. So the Chinese were very eager to launch certain projects here. They also offered to revive the Beirut-Tripoli railway and thus connect to Syria. So these are merely, I can say, initiatives or talks, but not concrete projects. They also, interestingly, they offer to expand and operate the Clayat airport and other important infrastructures in Lebanon. They also provided, or at least offered, their readiness to provide $2 billion loan for reconstruction efforts or to build bridges in Lebanon. However, all these projects were halted because it was fully dependent on the reconstruction and the conflict resolution in Syria. And this is why it's very important when we talk about the Chinese-Lebanese relations and the future. It's highly dependent also on stability in Syria. When it comes to dominant narratives, it's very, as we say, a la Lebanese, very typical Lebanese, because we have a sectarian perspective also when it comes to our perception, how we perceive China. So it's very interesting that according to the Arab Barometer, from 2017 to 2022, there was a positive increase of the Lebanese perception towards China from 51% to 71%. And it's very interesting that this sectarian reflection is a direct reflection on the regional dynamics. So if we go in detail, for example, we see that the support for China has increased. The Sunnis were around 41%, the Shias were 67%, the Christians were were low, and I would say why 53% and the Druze 44%. They all said that actually it's very important to deal with China. However, it depends on what issues we are dealing. Is it like security relations or actually no trade and so forth? The Shia perspective is very interesting because it was very high. So according to my analysis, this main perception was also linked to how Iran was directly engaged with China. When the Chinese were investing in Iran, at the same time there was this perception in certain media, let's say, closely affiliated with the Axis of Resistance in Lebanon, that there was this big alliance of Russia, China, Iran in the region, which is not an alliance actually. And we saw actually in the war and even in the Gaza crisis that the Chinese took very low profile, and let's not forget that Chinese are the main investors in the port of Haifa in Israel. So the Chinese interest in Israel are much higher than in Lebanon and even combined with Syria. So maybe if we do the same census now, I would argue that maybe this percentage would decrease. When it comes to the Sunni community, percentage was very average and there was a gradual increase, but this increase also was dependent on the Saudi and the Gulf country interaction with China. And this also has increased with the Chinese broker deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia in 2023 March. The Christian perspective is very interesting. It was always decreasing. So the main argument, at least my analysis or argument, is the following, that a lot of Christian people, maybe they thought that the Chinese or the increase of Chinese involvement or influence in Lebanon means directly it is linked also, it will open the path or the door for increase of Iranian influence in the country at the expense of the American and the Western influence in the country. So it's not about the tradition, China is the socialist and so forth, we are very afraid. No, it's purely about regional politics and directly linked to Iran's influence in the region. It's very interesting here also when it comes to, there was a mini Cold War, I would say, discussions and debates publicly between the Chinese and the American embassies in Lebanon. During in his one of speeches, late Secretary General of Hezbollah, Said Nasrallah, he said the following, that China is ready to invest $12.5 billion in Lebanon. So I tried to search in Chinese newspapers or official media about whether there is something like this deal. No, I couldn't find. However, the Lebanese media spread this news very fast, that China is ready and this can be an alternative path for the IMF, because IMF would be like an instrument for imperialism and American leverage and so forth and so on. Interestingly, the American embassy responded to this, saying that we have to be very cautious because, and I will quote the ambassador here, saying that the Chinese investments might come at the expense of the country's prosperity, stability, or the fiscal viability, or, of course, on the long-standing relations with the U.S., in which the Chinese embassy indirectly responded, saying that Chinese loans have no political strings. So there was a mini Cold War, which ended. But the interesting part was that the Lebanese officials were silent and almost non-existent in this mini Cold War, which was happening in Lebanon. When it comes to the challenges between the Lebanese-Chinese relations, of course there are also opportunities, but also the main challenges we can try to frame two main challenges. One is purely external, and the second is domestic. When it comes to external, definitely it is the U.S. pressure, let's say, on some Lebanese politicians, and maybe some Lebanese politicians were a bit reluctant or hesitant to cooperate or to sign strategic partnership agreement, even though Lebanon is part of the Belt and Road Initiative and signed in 2017. Maybe they were concerned that their position would be jeopardized if they consolidate their ties with the Chinese. The second, of course, is domestic. China is not a Caritas. It will not come with free hand and so forth. The Chinese businesses, if they want to invest and they will increase their investment or engage in a foreign direct investments, they need stability. And from 2019 to 2000 until now, or until the war, Lebanon was not stable country. Politically, it lacked the reforms. Economically, it lacked the reforms. There was also no political will from the Lebanese side. So these were the two main challenges that halted any possible cooperation with China. However, at the same time, the Chinese deep investments in certain areas, especially when it comes to economy and culture. For example, recently they are building the National Higher Conservatory Music building in the Baye. At the same time, they engage in humanitarian diplomacy. They are involved in the UNIFIL. They are helping the people, the vulnerable people in the south. They are also providing educational help for the Palestinian refugees. During the COVID area, they supported the Ministry of Health and so forth. So to conclude, basically, Lebanon plays an important role when it comes to the Belt and Road Initiative, and also because of its geostrategic location, but let's be humble, Lebanon is not so valuable compared to other countries in the region. So Lebanon should offer something to China so that the Chinese can come and engage in investment. Also, when it comes to the economic benefits, Chinese-funded infrastructure projects, there are some, but at the same time, there are certain projects that Lebanon can benefit, especially when it comes to reviving the port and the bordering areas with Syria, because when it comes to reconstruction in Syria, and the next panel, I mean, this will reflect on this, the Chinese are very interested also for security reasons, not just for economic reasons. And of course, when it comes to the challenges, as I said, despite the benefits, there are still challenges mainly related with the lack of the political will from the Lebanese side, but at the same time, the lack of reforms. So, thank you.
Thank you, Yeghia. So I think we'll move to Dr. Waref now for your presentation.
صباح الخير جميعا. بداية أشكر الزملاء في معهد عصام فارس للسياسات العامة والشؤون الدولية في الجامعة الأمريكية في بيروت على دعوتي الكريمة، ويسعدني أن أرحب بكم جميعا وبخاصة بالحضور الدبلوماسي الرفيع الذي يضفي على هذا اللقاء بعدا دوليا يعكس أهمية الموضوع المطروح. إن هذا اللقاء ليس مجرد مناسبة أكاديمية، بل فرصة حقيقية لتبادل الرؤى حول دور الصين المتنامي في العالم واستكشاف آفاق التعاون في منطقتنا وفي لبنان، تحديدا في ضوء ما تفرضه المرحلة من تحديات وفرص. سأحاول من خلال هذه الورقة تسليط الضوء على بعض ملامح العلاقة بين لبنان والصين وإمكانيات تطويرها ضمن رؤية تنموية واقعية، خصوصا في سياق مبادرة الحزام والطريق التي باتت تعيد رسم خرائط الاقتصاد والبنية التحتية في العديد من الدول، مما يجعل التفكير الجدي بتموضع لبنان داخل هذا الإطار ضرورة ملحة. يسرني أن أشارككم هذه الرؤية المتواضعة على أمل أن تسهم في فتح نقاش بناء نحو تعاون أكثر فعالية وشمولية. لابد من استعراض تاريخي. طريق الحرير هو عبارة عن مجموعة من الطرق كانت أو قيمت في عهد سلالة هان الصينية، ربطت مناطق العالم القديم منذ أكثر من 130 عاما قبل الميلاد إلى عام 1453 بعد الميلاد. طبعا طريق الحرير هو منطق كان يربط الشرق والغرب، ولم يكن هو مصطلح متعارف عليه إلا في العام 1877 عندما أطلق عليه الرحال الألماني اسم تسمية طريق الحرير. لبنان وطريق الحرير كانت ذكرنا في المرحلة السابقة، هذه الطرق كانت تمتد من الصين تدخل إلى آسيا الوسطى ووصولا إلى إيران ومن ثم العراق ومن ثم إلى معبر بوكمال ومن ثم إلى تدخل إلى جنوب لبنان عبر مسار الليطاني ومنها إلى مرفأ صور، وتنطلق القوافل البحرية من مرفأ صور إلى روما لتزويدهم في الحرير والمنتجات الصينية. فهذا الطريق الاختصار على العلاقة التاريخية بين لبنان والصين قبل الميلاد وبعد الميلاد. في العصر الحديث تمثل تاريخ العلاقات الصينية اللبنانية في توقيع الاتفاق التجاري بين لبنان والصين بعام 1955. وطبعا كان الهدف يعني حرفيا هو ذكر الاتفاق. الهدف من الاتفاق هو المساهمة في تدعيم الصداقة بين شعبي لبنان والصين عن طريق العلاقات التجارية والتعاون الاقتصادي بين بلديهما، وذلك على أساس المساواة والمنافع المتبادلة. يعني احنا من سنة 55 عم نحكي عن شيء اسمه وين وين سيتويشن. هلا حنتطرق بعام 2017 ونحكينا عن مبادرة الحزام والطريق. طبعا قبل العلاقات التجارية كان هناك علاقات ثقافية ربطت الصين ولبنان من خلال جبران خليل جبران. أعمال جبران خليل جبران ترجمت إلى اللغة الصينية في عام 1923 وفي عام 1931، والآن يعتبر جبران خليل جبران الكتاب الثاني المترجم إلى اللغة الصينية، وهو الأكثر قراءة بعد ألف ليلة وليلة في العصر الحديث. أيضا إضافة إلى البعد الثقافي هناك علاقات إنسانية ونضالية. هذه العلاقات رائدها كان اللبناني جورج حاتم مهايدي، أيضا درس في الجامعة الأمريكية في بيروت عامين قبل الانتقال إلى جنيف ومن ثم إلى شنغهاي، والتحق في المسيرة الكبرى مع التشيرمان ماو تسي تونغ، وهو كان طبيبه الخاص، إضافة إلى أنه كان يعتبر من الشخصيات التي حولت نظام المنظومة الصحية في الصين من الحالة التي كانت بها إلى الحالة يمكن التي نشهدها حاليا. فيعتبر هو رائد المنظومة الصحية في الصين، هو أول أجنبي يحصل على الجنسية الصينية وأول أجنبي يحصل على عضوية الحزب الشيوعي الصيني في ذاك الزمن. وأيضا في عام 2009 تم اختياره من ضمن 100 شخصية كانت لها تأثير على تاريخ الصين الحديث. فهذه العلاقات كنا نحكي عن علاقات تجارية قديمة وعلاقات ثقافية وعلاقات نضالية، وهون نحن اللبنانيين كنا سبقون إلى هذه العلاقات. طبعا العلاقات الدبلوماسية بشكل رسمي تم التوقيع عنها في عام 1971. هذه بعض الوثائق هي منشورة في كتابي الأول التنين وطائر الفينيق، متوفرة مجانا أونلاين. معظم الوثائق التي تحدثت عنها منشورة في الكتاب، هو أول كتاب يوثق بالوثائق العلاقات اللبنانية الصينية. أيضا مبادرة الحزام والطريق كما كلنا نعرف عنها، لبنان تكريسا لهذه العلاقات التاريخية وعلاقات التي تحدثت عنها تم التوقيع في عام 2017 على اتفاقية مبادرة الحزام والطريق. طبعا هذه الاتفاقية هي مذكر تفاهم حول الترويج المشترك للتعاون في إطار الحزام الاقتصادي لطريق الحرير ومبادرة طريق الحرير البحرية للقرن ال21، وباختصارها هي الحزام والطريق. تنص هذه المذكرة على التعاون الجانبين في مجالات اهتمام مشترك، منها النقل واللوجستيات والبنية التحتية والاستثمار والتجارة والطاقة المتجددة والتبادل الثقافي بين الشعوب والصحة والرياضة. طبعا هذه المبادرة أعلن عنها الرئيس الصيني في عام 2013، فنتطرق لها. صديقنا يغي حكي عن الممر البحري والممر البري، لن أتطرق إليه بتفاصيل، ولكن الركائز الأساسية لمبادرة الحزام والطريق هي تقوم على البنية التحتية من خلال بناء الطرق والموانئ وسكك الحديد ومناطق صناعية، أيضا الترابط التجاري من خلال تسهيل حركة التجارة عبر ممرات اقتصادية عالمية، والتفاهم الثقافي من خلال تعزيز التبادل الثقافي والإنساني بين الشعوب، إضافة إلى التنمية المستدامة من خلال دعم مشاريع تنموية تعزز النمو المشترك. وطبعا الأهداف الرئيسية للمبادرة هي تعزيز الترابط العالمي ودعم التنمية وتعزيز التجارة وبناء مجتمع مصير مشترك البشرية، وهذا الأمر يشدد عليه الرئيس الصيني، أو في الثقافة الصينية نسمع دائما عن بناء مجتمع مصير مشترك البشرية. طبعا هو له ارتباطات عالمية في التنمية في الأمن وفي الاستقرار. منذ انطلاقة هذه المبادرة مبادرة الحزام والطريق في عام 2013، الصين وقعت أكثر من 200 وثيقة تعاون في إطار مبادرة الحزام والطريق مع أكثر من 150 دولة وأكثر من 30 منظمة دولية، مما يشمل أكثر من 3/4 دول العالم. وأنشأت الصين أكثر من 3000 مشروع تعاون، تتدفق البضائع الصينية الآن إلى أكثر من 300 ميناء حول العالم. طبعا لن أدخل في أرقام البنك الدولي والتقديرات أهمية هذه المبادرة استفادا من الوقت. الصين شيدت 6 ممرات اقتصادية دولية رئيسية تحدث عنها صديقنا يغي حول الجسر البري الأوراسي الجديد، حول الممر الاقتصادي بين الصين ومنغوليا. الممر الاقتصادي هذا هو يعنينا هو الممر اللي يربط لبنان بطريقة غير مباشرة، هو الممر الاقتصادي بين الصين وآسيا الوسطى وغرب آسيا من شينجيانغ عبر آسيا الوسطى إلى الخليج العربي والبحر المتوسط وشبه الجزيرة العربية، الممر الاقتصادي الصيني الباكستاني والجسر القاري لغرب آسيا، والممر الاقتصادي بين الصين وشبه الجزيرة الهندية. النتائج الحالية لهذه المبادرة، هناك اتفاقيات مع أكثر من 30 منظمة دولية، أكثر من 200 اتفاقية موقعة تشمل أكثر من 150 دولة، أكثر من 3000 مشروع، أكثر من 1.2 تريليون دولار استثمارات جذبتها المبادرة. هناك اتفاقيات تعاون في التجارة الحرة بين الصين وأكثر من 28 دولة ومنطقة. هناك أكثر من 19 أو خطينا ال 20 تريليون دولار إجمالي قيمة الصادرات والواردات بين الصين والدول المشاركة في هذه المبادرة. هناك أكثر من 25 دولة و200 مدينة يربط بهم سكك حديد بين الصين وأوروبا. طبعا فرص العمل اللي يمكن إحصائها، ولكن هناك تقديرات تزيد عن 500,000 فرصة عمل تم الاستفادة منها. طبعا بالدخول الى الجانب اللبناني قبل كوفيد-19، يعني عديد من الشركات الصينيه ابدت اهتماما كبيرا في الاستثمار في والمشاركه في لبنان من خلال قطاعات الطاقه والغاز والاتصالات السلكيه واللاسلكيه، لا سيما سكك الحديد والمياه وغيرها من مجالات البنيه التحتيه. وايضا من نفق بيروت البقاع، كتبت عنه مقاله في جريده النهار ممكن العوده له بالتفصيل. ساعدت السفاره الصينيه في بيروت طبعا مجتمعات الأعمال ورواد الأعمال مشاركة في تبادل التجاري من خلال المشاركة في معرض الصين للاستيراد. كنا نحن نعرف دائما هناك معارض للتصدير، ولكن الصين منذ أكثر من 7 سنوات أطلقت مجموعة من المعارض الدولية لتشجيع المستثمرين أو التجار إلى الدخول إلى الأسواق الصينية وليس العكس. ولبنان كان له عدة منصات من خلال مشاركة وزارة الاقتصاد في بعض المعارض. أيضا في إطار التعاون ضمن مبادرة الحزام الطريق وتعزيز التفاهم بين الشعبين وتجهيز الصداقة الصينية اللبنانية، مولت الحكومة الصينية الكونسرفاتوار الوطني بهبة تجاوزت 62 مليون دولار. الكونسرفاتوار الوطني هو مقابل، كنا نعرف يمكن مقابل الأبي سي أو على المارينا، هو المشروع الوحيد خلال الأزمة اللي مرق فيها لبنان بالآونة الأخيرة، الأزمة السياسية والاقتصادية والمالية وكوفيد-19، لم يتوقف البناء فيه. يعني كل المشاريع في لبنان توقفت إلا المشروع الصيني لم يتوقف. الآن المشروع الصيني وصل لمرحلة التشطيب الكونسرفاتوار، وكان هناك زيارة تفقدية الأسبوع الماضي لدولة رئيس الحكومة لهذا المشروع. أيضا لبنان مؤخرا استلم هبة صينية لأوجيرو للتزويد 358 موقع بأوجيرو بالطاقة الشمسية. تخيلوا كلياتنا قاعدين هلا مثلا بدون واي فاي أو بدون واتساب. يعني عم نحكي قديش أهمية إنه دائما أحيانا المشاريع اللي بتجيك بالضرورة والحاجات هي أهم من أي مشروع ممكن ما يكون بتوقيته أو بوقته. كمان الصين ما بيخفي دورة كان بعام 2006 شاركت الصين والتزام من خلال مشاركتها في قوات حفظ السلام في جنوب لبنان. في عندنا أكثر من 7000 جندي وضابط خلال هذه المرحلة يتعاقبوا على المشاركة في قوات حفظ السلام. وأيضا الصين خلال انفجار مرفأ بيروت كانت هذه الوحدات كانت عم تساهم بعملية الإنقاذ والإغاثة وتنظيف الشوارع، وقدمت هبة لإعادة تجهيز إعادة تجهيز مبنى وزارة الخارجية بعد انفجار مرفأ بيروت، والهبة صارت يعني موجودة بيتنفذ العمل فيها. طبعا بالدخول أكثر في عمق في الأرقام، التبادل التجاري بين لبنان والصين، يعني طبعا احنا حنشوف بالارقام وحنمكن نحكي شوي بتفاصيل اكثر اذا سمح الوقت. الصين تبوأت المرتبه الاولى على لائحه ابرز الدول المصدره الى لبنان في العام 2024. شكلت المنتجات الصينيه نحو 12% من اجمالي المستوردات اللبنانيه، في المقابل احتلت الصين المرتبه 33 من الاسواق المستقبله للمنتجات اللبنانيه، حيث لم تتجاوز حصه الصادرات اللبنانيه اليها 1%. ويظهر هذا التفاوت الواضح في الميزان التجاري أحد التحديات الأساسية التي تواجه العلاقات الاقتصادية بين البلدين، مما يستدعي العمل المشترك على تطوير آليات أكثر فعالية لتعزيز التبادل التجاري المتوازن وفتح الأسواق أمام المنتجات اللبنانية بما يخدم مصالح الطرفين ويرسخ الشراكة القائمة على الاحترام والمنفعة المتبادلة. أيضا في الحديث في الأرقام في الميزان التجاري، رغم ما تشهده العلاقات اللبنانية الصينية من تطور ملحوظ في مجالات عدة المستعدة لا يزال الميزان التجاري بين البلدين يميل بشكل كبير لصالح الصين، فقد ارتفع العجز التجاري من نحو 151.9 مليون دولار في عام 1993 إلى مستوى قياسي بلغ 2.7 مليار دولار في العام 2022 قبل أن يتراجع إلى نحو 1.9 مليار دولار في عام 2024. هذا الواقع لا يقلل من أهمية الشراكة بين الجانبين، بل يدعو إلى تعزيز الجهود المشتركة لفتح آفاق جديدة أمام المنتجات اللبنانية في السوق الصينية، مما يرسخ مفهوم التبادل المتوازن ويعزز العلاقات الاقتصادية القائمة على المنفعة المتبادلة. طبعا لن أغوص في تفاصيل العلاقة لبنان ومرفأ طرابلس والصين ومرفأ طرابلس. هناك اهتمام متزايد في مرفأ طرابلس كونه أول قربه إلى الحدود السورية من عبر الحمص، وإعادة إعمار سوريا سوف يكون للبنان حصة كبيرة من خلال هذا المرفأ. طبعا بعام 2023 تم تطوير مرفأ طرابلس من خلال الشركة المشغلة CMA-CGM اللي عم تديره بتشغله، وأضافت بسميها احنا رافعات أو الونش. كان عندنا 2 صاروا 3، وكان عندنا 4 أوناش للتخزين صاروا 9. هودي الأهميتهم إنه هذه الرافعات الموجودة هلا حاليا بمرفأ طرابلس تضاهي يعني توازي أو تعادل ما هو موجود حاليا في سنغافورة والولايات المتحدة وروتردام في هولندا. يعني بمعنى نحن البنية التحتية لمرفأ بيروت أصبح جاهز لأعمال توازي هذه المرافق العالمية. طبعا الصين أبدت اهتماما في تشغيل مطار إقلاعات ومعرض الشيكرامي الدولي، وصار هناك جولات تفقدات ميدانية لهم، ولكن طبعا الظروف الراهنة حالت دون يعني العمل أكثر بهذا الاتجاه. مشروع نفق بيروت البقاع هذا مشروع حيوي، الصين كمان أبدت اهتمام فيه. طبعا اللي بيعرف الصين وإمكانياتها في موضوع الأنفاق والجسور وبناء البنية التحتية بالنسبة لهم مثل ما بقولوا بيناتس، يعني إنه هذا النفق اللي عم نحكي عنه 26 كيلومتر بحجم المشاريع الهائلة اللي شفناها بالصين. بعتقد مشروع حيكون سهل أمام الشركات الصينية إذا كان في شفافية بالتعاطي بهذا الملف، ويكون هناك كمان يتطلب إرادة وطنية واضحة تخطيطا استراتيجيا من الجانب اللبناني تحقيق تحول اقتصادي فعلي يعود بالنفع على الكافة. هذا النفق أهميته أنه بيرجع إعادة إحياء منطقة البقاع ومحيطها من خلال مرفأ جاف، وبيحيطوا مناطق صناعية وبيصير محطة للتصدير المنطقة العربية، ليس الاتكال فقط على مرفأ بيروت. طبعا هناك العشرات من مشاريع التعاون المقترحة بين لبنان والصين، ومعظم قديش بعدنا معقول بياخذ 2 minutes منك. اوكي. طبعا في عندنا مشاريع التعاون، عندنا العشرات مشاريع التعاون. المشاريع هذه اوريدي يعني صار في حديث فيها، في مشاريع هي افكار كمان جاهزه والصينيين ابدوا استعدادهم لها من خلال بالبنية التحتية من معامل توليد الطاقة لتنقية المياه وتحكينا عن تلوث الليطاني. الصينيين قدموا مشروع لتنظيف نهر الليطاني من مصب إلى البحر. شبكة اتصالات، تأمين وسائل نقل حديثي، بالإضافة لرفع مستوى تأهيل مسطار بيروت مطار القليعات. طبعا بالصين عندها كمان أبدت مبادرات بتحسين جودة استمرار خدمات الهاتف الخليوي. في كمان عندنا شركة مشغلة موجودة هوا من الوجود بلبنان حاليا. إنشاء ممرات عبر الحدود للكهرباء، أيضا اعتماد لبنان انطلاقا نحو شمال أفريقيا وجنوب أوروبا. طبعا تعاون بالغاز والبتروكيماويات، إذا في حال إن شاء الله صار عندنا غاز الصين كمان جاهزين. في الابتكار العلمي والتكنولوجي موجودين. في كمان دعم الصناعات اللبنانية من خلال القروض ميسر من البنك الآسيوي للاستثمار، كمان هن كمان جاهزين. التعاون الثقافي الدكتور تحدث عنه بشكل مفصل. بالختام هناك الكثير من الفرص الواعدة يمكن العمل عليها بشكل مشترك، فالصين بما تملكه من خبرات وقطاعات كبيرة ورائدة بإمكانها مساعدة لبنان في الكثير من المجالات والقطاعات، بحيث لا يبرز عدد قليل فقط من الفائزين وأغلبية من الخاسرين من خلال ممارسة مبادئ التشاور المكثف والمساهمة المشتركة والفوائد المشتركة، بهدف جعل الأرقام الخارجة من الحزام والطريق أكثر إثارة للإعجاب. بعد أن بلغت الأزمة اللبنانية التي تعصف بالكيان والنظام وبنى الدولة والاقتصاد والمجتمع مرحلة بالغة الخطورة، مع دخول لبنان مرحلة التفكك لا قدر الله والانهيار الشامل على كل المستويات وسيادة الفوضى الشبه المطلقة على نحو لا سابق له في تاريخه. تبعا لذلك تتأكد حاجة البلد الملحة إلى حركة نضال سياسي اجتماعي على كل مستويات ذات بعد إصلاحي إنقاذي تساهم في إعادة توحيد القوى المجتمع اللبناني وتعمل على توحيد فئاته المتضررة لإطلاق مسيرة التغيير في التقدم الحدث. وكلنا أمل أن يستفيد بلدنا الصغير من هذه التجربة الصينية الرائدة في الإصلاح والانفتاح التي رعتها وقررتها القيادة الصينية. شكرا لكم.
Thank you, Dr. Waref. If you would like to start, Dr. Nisrine.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I would like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to share the experience of the Confucius Institute at St. Joseph University of Beirut, CIUSG. Before we dive into the details, let me give you a quick overview of today's presentations. We'll walk through the history, mission, programs, partnership, challenges, and future direction of the Confucius Institute at St. Joseph University of Beirut. Confucius Institutes are non-profit educational and cultural institutions established through partnerships between Chinese and foreign universities. There are over 500 Confucius Institutes and 1,000 Confucius classrooms operating in more than 150 countries. However, recent years have brought change. Many Confucius Institutes in the United States have closed, largely due to political pressure and concern about academic freedom. This led to the restructuring of the global network. The original body, Hanban, a government-affiliated office, was replaced by the Center for Language Education and Cooperation, a non-governmental, non-profit organization under China's Ministry of Education. Unlike some institutes that evolved into quasi-economic and commercial offices, the Confucius Institute at St. Joseph University has remained firmly committed to its educational and cultural role only. We are not a trade center, not a political arm, but a hub of learning, dialogue, and cultural operation. CIUSG was founded in 2006 through a partnership between St. Joseph University of Beirut and Shenyang Normal University with the support of Hanban. Lebanon was chosen as the first country in the Middle East to host a Confucius Institute. Why Lebanon? Lebanon is a historical crossroad of civilizations. Its multilingualism, high education level, and openness to dialogue made it a natural partner. Why USG? USG is a private university with a public mission. Founded in 1975, it's one of the regional leaders in humanities, language, and international cooperation. Its Jesuit values, academic excellence, and humanist tradition made it the perfect host. The partnership was not just academic, it was symbolic, a bridge between East and West, between Beirut and Shenyang. Our mission is simple yet essential: promote Chinese language and culture, encourage cultural and academic exchange, build bridges of mutual understanding. We are more than a language center, we are a platform for connection, cooperation, and intercultural discovery. We offer Mandarin courses for children, teenagers, university students, and professionals. We are the only certified center in Lebanon for HSK and HSKK exams, essential credential for students applying to scholarship or pursuing careers in China. Beyond language, we bring culture to life through calligraphy and traditional painting, Chinese cuisine workshops, traditional Chinese medicine, cultural celebration like the Chinese New Year and the Chinese chess competition, and many more. These are moments of learning, joy, and cross-cultural friendship. Each year, we offer summer camps in China for students, scholarships for long and short-term study, a special program for Lebanese school principals and educators, along with governmental officers, to visit China and explore its educational system. We don't just teach about China, we offer real immersion. Through these programs, China is not only building relationships, it's influencing the new generation of Lebanese leaders, educators, and decision makers. CIUSG is part of a global network, but also deeply local. We collaborate with Lebanese schools and universities, NGOs and public institutions, cultural centers and municipalities. Our strength is in partnerships across disciplines, sectors, and borders. In 18 years, we have taught thousands of students, certified hundreds through official Chinese exams, hosted national competitions like Chinese Bridge, published teaching material in Arabic and French, built lasting institutional links between Lebanon and China. We face significant challenges. The economic crisis, the financial collapse in Lebanon has made it hard for families to afford language classes, even with lower tuitions. Chinese is often viewed as optional, and students prioritize more practical choices. The COVID-19 forced us to move online for long periods, disrupting engagement and classroom experience. Recent war in Lebanon has delayed the return of Chinese teachers and volunteers who still haven't received clearance to re-enter the country. Geopolitical tensions. The growing divide between China and the United States affects how people view Confucius institutes. Some institutions hesitate to partner with us for fear of losing collaborations or funding from US allies. The intellectual property concerns. Some academic and research institutions hesitate to collaborate on projects related to research and innovation, fearing that their intellectual property or technological advancement might be copied or misused. These concerns, though not unique to China, create an additional barrier to establishing trust and launching joint initiatives. These are real challenges, but they reinforce our commitment to neutrality, education, and sincere cultural dialogue. The Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, is China's global framework for economic, infrastructure, and people-to-people cooperation. It spans Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. Confucius Institute are a key part of the cultural and educational pillar of the BRI. At CIUSG, we prepare Lebanese youth to interact with China's growing global role, build cultural understanding that supports future business and diplomatic ties. Other skills that are relevant in a world where China is an essential global actor. We are not involved in politics, but we help prepare students and professionals for the reality of a globalized, interconnected world. CIUSG also supports Lebanese companies doing business with China. We offer tailor-made training programs for professionals. One example, we partnered with a Lebanese pharmaceutical company that was struggling to navigate the Chinese job market. We delivered a customized course to explain Chinese workplace norms and negotiation culture, share practical tips to secure job opportunities and partnerships, build the team's confidence and cultural readiness. These trainings are strategic, not academic. They are designed around real-world needs and business objectives. In a time marked by division and global uncertainty, building understanding through education and culture is more relevant than ever. The Confucius Institute at St. Joseph University stands as a place of dialogue, learning, and opportunity, rooted in transparency, professionalism, and respect of diversity. I thank you all for your attention and looking forward to engaging in meaningful exchange. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank each of our speakers for these insightful discussions. It's a big learning on China and its role in Lebanon.